in 1998, I got a call from an old friend that we'd gotten saved in the early 70s. He'd actually gone with us in the beginning to Guatemala for 6 months. He was an older brother. He was probably 30. And he kind of came to keep his eye on us kids. Hello, Anna. And so he said, hey, Alex and Rini, who we were in the pottery business together with, had been in Birmingham. They came as missionaries in 1980. And their 9th child was born with Down syndrome. The Lord showed them that he was going to bring them to Wales. So they moved to a little small holding, about 12 acres, the central part of an old farm. And it needed a lot of work. So our friend Tony called up and said, listen, I've just come back from Wales. We want to take a small group next spring. Would you and Gladys pray about coming over with us? And so we came over in 1999 in April. And some of us stayed at Alex's, but several of us stayed in a little cottage in Kilgarran that belonged to a minister friend of Alex, also from Birmingham. And we were driving back and forth every day. I grew up in the country, so I would always take a different little road I like to explore. And so as I went back and forth, I kept seeing chapels everywhere. You know, a lot of them looked like they were no longer used. There was a little tiny one, there were some medium-sized ones. Some that looked like they were totally ruined. I didn't know anything about the Welsh revival other than the fact that there had been a Welsh revival. It had touched the nations of the world. I didn't know any names, I didn't know any places, that was all I knew. But as this 12 days went on, I just kept having this like grieving in my spirit, because Wales is such an extraordinarily beautiful country, and I knew that less than 4% of the population went to any kind of church at all, much less really had a relationship with our loving God and Father. So from the cottage where we were staying, I wake up in the morning, and having moved from the highlands of Guatemala, we lived a mile high up in the volcanoes, to the flats of the Louisiana swamps. Any hill that was 50 feet or higher was very appealing. And so for where we were, I was looking out the window and I could see this green hilltop, and it was like a magnet. There was just something that was drawing me up here. And so I think it was 2 days before we were going to leave, I found myself awake at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I said, okay, Lord, I'm going up there. So I threw on my clothes and I started walking out of the village. And that morning it wasn't raining, but you could feel it was like just about to rain. And I thought, well, maybe I should bring the car, but no, I just knew I was supposed to walk for some reason. And I said, well, Lord, you can keep me dry. So I left the village and I wound my way up the hill along the lanes, came across the crossroads, and I got up to the little dog leg at the top of the lane here, and it swings left, and just on the left-hand side there was a paving machine. And I thought, awesome, they're going to pave these little bumpy, not very good Welsh roads. And so I came across the cattle grid. No, wait, I'm sorry. Erase that for a couple of minutes. That was my second trip. I came across I saw the sign that said Kildare Chapel. And we're fine, I think, Jim. I'm not worried about it. And it was just another chapel, and I had no idea there was a chapel down here. So I came across, and at that point it was just a gravel road, well, mostly grass with 2 gravel tracks that came right down to the chapel. And so I walked down, and I looked through the gate of the chapel, and I was weeping. I was just, the Lord's heart was just grieving, and I was grieving with it. Because I didn't know whether this chapel was in use or not in use. At that particular juncture, the uphill part of the graveyard was just, as you see it now, perfectly manicured and maintained. On this side of the chapel, most of the gravestones were all tumbled over. The grass was waist high, and that had been knocked over by rain and wind, and it was just looked derelict. So I just kind of looked through the gate, and I looked and I just wept, and I thought, wow, Lord, this is just so sad. So sad. And so I went back up, and I went up to the little village, and I turned up at the crossroads and found my way up going through a lane up to the top of the hill through some fields, and climbed over a gate or two, I think. And as I was getting up closer to the top of the hill, my heart was really broken. And I was asking the Lord, how is it possible? I mean, this wasn't even 100 years ago, that the people, there's hardly anybody goes to church. All these chapels are just in disuse. And I was just weeping and just saying, God. And at one point, as I was getting close to the top, there were these two stone walls, or hedgerows, that met right at the top of the hill. And as I glanced up and I saw them, I'd asked the Lord what happened. And I looked at the hedgerows, and the Lord spoke to me, and he said, because they've come away from the ancient landmarks. My people have abandoned me, their loving Father, and they've become self-satisfied with religion and ritual and just tradition. And they walked away from me. And I was just weeping and weeping and just interceding. And I got up on one of these walls that, there's a hedgerow, but the hedges were long gone, and it's just stone and, earth in the middle. But it was very interesting that morning because the clouds were like, they were like muffins in a tin, just like packed solid. And they were just blowing quite fast, and it was quite windy. And I thought, a couple of times the wind gave me a good push. I wanted to, assure my footing. And so I'm up there and I'm praying and I'm weeping and I'm praying in tongues. And suddenly as I'm watching, the clouds parted and this big shaft of yellow sunlight comes blazing down through the clouds, sweeps over a grassy bit of meadow into a wooded part, and then disappears again. But as soon as I saw that, I felt something in my spirit beginning to churn up. And I didn't know what it was, and so I was just praying some more, and as I said, I was weeping. And another minute or so went by, and suddenly, and I'm looking in a different direction, and suddenly the clouds part again, and I could see this golden beam of sunlight come racing down over the field just by the drive, and it comes down to this chapel, but instead of sweeping over it, it stopped right on the chapel. I could just see these golden flames just going heavenwards around the chapel, and God spoke to me. He said, I'm bringing revival again to Wales. I'm bringing revival to this place. And I'm just unglued. Oh, God, that's amazing. Yes, Lord. And so I'm just praying my head out, and a couple of minutes later, and I'm praying, and I'm looking off in a different direction. And off in the distance, suddenly the clouds part again, and this beam of sun comes down and lights up this chapel way off on a distant hill. And closes up, but God again says, I'm bringing revival to this land again, and it's going to touch the nations. And so I'm even more unglued, some of you can probably relate to that. I didn't know I could cry any harder, Lord. And a minute or so later, suddenly God picked me up in the spirit, and he picked me up like a couple of 100 yards, and I could see over this great big hill called Vreni Vaur that I couldn't see over before. And off in the distance, once again, the clouds part, this big beam of light comes down and lights up this old white chapel way off somewhere down there in Pembrokeshire. And again, the Lord says, I'm bringing revival, and it's going to spread from here. And the next thing I know, I'm looking at elsewhere, but I'm still up at this exalted, wherever I was, and the Lord kind of gave me telescopic vision, and I could see way over into the south bit of Wales. I could see all the way into England. I could see up into Scotland, and time again, the Lord just kept beaming these sunlight down on churches and chapels, saying, I'm bringing revival again to this land. And it's going to go across the channel into the cold, heart of Europe and touch the nations of Europe, and it's going to go around the world and rock the nations, and I'm just a mess. So after probably an hour and a half on the top of the hill, I looked at my watch, and it was after 8 o'clock. We were supposed to be over at Alex's farm at 9 o'clock, and I left the car. I'd walked up here, and it's a good walk. So I came back down, and I got to the crossroads, and just as I got to the crossroads, a little car comes up the hill with his blinker headed towards Kilgarran. So I waved my thumb like that, and they called me in and dropped me off in front of the cottage. And I went in. It was 20 till 9. Everybody had finished breakfast, wondering where the heck I had gone. I had the keys to the car. I was the designated driver. So I grabbed my work clothes, and off we went. And I shared. We had a little devotional before we'd start working on Alex's farm, and I shared what the Lord had shown me, and it was just amazing. So when we went back to the States, I was very interested in finding out, well, what was the Welsh revival? What happened? Who and when? And so as I began to study the details, I thought, wow, this is amazing. I began to pray, come on, Lord, pour it out, because I'd seen this incredible vision. And so, God, do it, And then I found out that there was going to be a meeting in the stadium in Cardiff to pray for revival. And this would have been probably, I think it was going to be in the fall of 1999. I don't remember if it was Carl Brettel maybe had something to do with that, or it might have been Robin Rees. But anyway, that didn't come to pass, but that's when I began to find out a little bit about the Welsh revival. And my friend Tony, who had organized the trip, we talked about coming again the next year, and it didn't work out. The year after that, it didn't work out, but he said, listen, I'm really determined. We need to help Alex some more. Why don't you make the plans? I had people in our church. I brought some photographs back and told them a little about my experience, and they all wanted to come and help. So in 2002, in late April, we came over with a group from our Verbo Spanish church in New Orleans with 6 people. And again, we were staying in the cottage with one of the couples, the other either single or, they came without their spouses. Some young folks stayed with another family, friends of Alex's, and we were working. And that was when, at this point, we just came back. We were going to help Alex, and I had been praying for Wales, but I didn't really, that was all I thought. We were just going to come again and help our friend. But in that experience, the second day, Alex had hired rented a little mini backhoe, mini digger they call it. And he needed some ditches dug and a little bit of grading. And I'm not a great operator, but I had done a little bit when I was young. So I'm out on this little tractor all day, trying to flatten out some stuff, and I'm getting thrown back and forth. Like I said, I'm not a very good operator. I've driven with good operators, and you can drive across mountains and it feels like you're on a highway. Not me. So by the end of the afternoon, I'd been getting rocked around by this little machine, the motor right behind me going, "Arr!" And so at 4:30 when we would knock off, everybody would kind of go into the kitchen for coffee and just to chill until it was supper time. But I just wanted to be by myself. I wanted some peace and quiet. I wanted to spend some time with the Lord. And so I went out towards the end of the farm buildings, and I went out past the old cattle shed. And behind the cattle shed, there was this old pile of rubble. And sticking out, it was all overgrown with weeds, but on the bottom side, as I walked on, I said to the Lord, I would love something soft to sit on that doesn't move around. I mean, it was just a thought. But I got around to the bottom, and here's this slab of concrete sticking out with about 3 inches of moss growing on it. And I sat down. And I was just immediately overwhelmed with the love of God. And, he was just spoiling me rotten. Here I was with friends. We'd known and loved each other for 25 years, 30 years at that point. And, I grew up in dairy country, so the sights and the smells were just, it was like magic to me. And here I'm just overwhelmed with God's love. as I sat there, I opened my eyes at one point. I was looking out over the neighboring farms and a little village that had a chapel in it. And I was just weeping and saying, God, it just doesn't seem, it's just not reasonable. How is it you show me so much of your amazing love, and yet these people haven't a clue? They haven't a clue. And I just was weeping again profusely. And at one point, as I opened my eyes and I looked out over the village, and I said, God, if there were anything that I could do. Immediately the Lord spoke to me again, and he said, do you remember the vision in this chapel that I showed you? I said, yes, Lord, I do. He said, well, I want you to come to that chapel, and I want you to pray there every day, and the revival that I showed you is going to break out there, and it's going to be spontaneous in many places, just as in the vision I showed you. And I'm on the floor again. I mean, I'm undone. But then immediately, God, move again? Lord, I own a house. Well, the bank owns most of it, but I'm paying the bank. Never had a house before. Lord, we still had kids at home. Lord, I was kind of like the CFO and in charge of the finances of all of our missions in Latin America. But, God was just so clear. He said, if you say yes, then everything that you're putting up here is a difficulty. Forget it. I got it all covered. So I'm weeping. I don't know if I was laughing at that point. I could do a good bit now. But it was just like, it just floored me, This is like the answer to prayer. This is the prayers of nations that are being answered, God. So I went back to the house, and I remember I ran into Alex and Minnie. They were feeding the horses, and I told them really briefly what God had showed me, and tried not to cry too much. I have a hard time with that sometimes. And I told Gladys. This time, Gladys was having a real difficult time. She never got her body clock to work. The weather wasn't great. The couple we were staying in the cottage were having a real struggle amongst themselves. So it was kind of tough for her. But I told Alex and Rainey, I told Gladys a little bit, and that was all. When I went to bed that night, I said, okay, Lord, this is really you. You get me up there early in the morning and we'll have a chat. And so next morning at 5 o'clock, bing, I'm wide open. I think the Lord gave me a few shots of espresso before he woke me up. So I was pumped. This time I brought the car because I remembered how far it was. And I drove up, and that was the time I come around the bend, and there on the little lay-by is this paving machine. So I said, okay, they're going to fix up these little lanes. And so I come across the cattle grid, and there's this brand spanking new layer of asphalt, not a tire track on it. They just finished it literally the day before, the afternoon before. And the Lord spoke to me and said, you see, I'm getting this place ready to bring people into this place. And I was just overwhelmed again. And I stopped the car and I got out. I felt like I was walking on holy ground. There wasn't a sign that anybody had been on this road. So I came down to the gate, and I just stood and I looked at the building, and I thought, wow. I mean, look at this is what do we all long for? What's the thing we most long for? To see multitudes come running to Jesus. And this was to look at this and to hear what he had said. It was, it's like looking out through that frosted glass, and then look out through the open bit, and you see this incredible. It was like, God, this is just so amazing. So I'm standing out there bawling like a baby. I come through the gate. I tried the door, as I suspected it was locked. So I went up to the top of the cemetery, and there was a pile of earth right up by that little beech tree. So I'm standing up near the top and looking at the chapel, and I'm just trying to get my head and my heart around the fact, wow, uproot again. I've known several times, and when you sign up to be a missionary, kids, guess what? Keep your bags handy. So anyway, I was just, as I was up at the top and I was looking at the chapel, and I wanted to say yes, but I had all these situations that just looked like, well, how can I do this, Lord? But the Spirit of the Lord was just really doing something in me. And at that juncture, the weather pattern was totally different this time. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. The sun was up, you know, not terribly high. It was like 5:15 or so in the morning. Sun comes up here around, 4:15 in the height of summer. And, but off in that direction, there was this dark blue storm front, and it was like it had been painted against the horizon with a big roller in dark blue paint. But it was way off there. And so I'm up there, and I saw that, and I'm looking at the chapel, and my mind is racing with, you know, my children and the house, and et cetera, et cetera. And the Lord was just beginning to really stir in my heart. Well, this is really what I'm asking you to do. And at that point, I looked off in the distance this way, and there was one cloud, and it was silvery white, and it was the shape of a spearhead, and it was being blown by the wind. Well, I didn't. The first time I just saw it, but after a minute I looked again, and it was still there, and it was being blown directly towards where I was here at the chapel. And it was a little, you know, it was closer, I could see. It must have been 2 miles off when I first saw it. So I'm up there, and I'm praying probably 15, 20 minutes, maybe a bit more, I don't know, you don't keep track. But again, the Lord is speaking to me. My list is getting longer by the minute of why we can't do this ridiculous thing. And I looked again, and I see this little cloud like this diamond, this spearhead is getting closer and closer, and it's like coming lower and blowing directly toward where I am. And I'm going, wow, God, you're really up to something here, aren't you? You mean business. And at that point, I caught a little glimmer of color over against that storm front. And lo and behold, I see the colors of a rainbow starting to come up from the ground in the cloud bank. And I thought, I said, wow, Lord, there's going to be a rainbow. He says, yes, there's going to be a rainbow. And so I'm watching that, and again, I'm looking at the chapel, and again, my mind is racing, you know. There's a lot of stuff in your mind when you're 55. As some of you can relate to, you know. But, you know, it was just amazing as God just began to speak to me more and more. And I look again, and the rainbow is getting brighter and brighter. And at last, I mean, it's like a neon light. But where the cloud stops, the rainbow stops. I mean, there was a total blue sky. The little white cloud, I didn't notice that again. But at this point, I was fascinated by the rainbow. And at one point, I found myself saying, God, if this is really you, let's see this rainbow fill the whole arch. And as soon as I said that, I'm not supposed to challenge God, but I did. And as I watched, after, who knows, 30 seconds, a minute, the colors of the rainbow started coming up off in the cloud, headed up into this bright blue morning sky. And they continued up towards the apex, and then I glanced down towards the woods here, and up out of the woods, this whole rainbow came and filled out right before my eyes, joined up. It wasn't as bright, because there was nothing you make rainbows out of. I mean, I've never made one, but... and so I said, okay, God, you've got me. I began to weep even harder, and I just said, okay, Lord, you said you're going to do it all. You got to do it all. And he said, I'm going to do it all. And I just kind of started getting more of a download, and you know, it was just amazing. So I said, okay, Lord, but you have one challenge that I can't deal with. You're going to have to talk to Gladys, because Gladys is struggling. And he just said, if you say yes, I will take care of everything. And so I said, okay, God, I had peace about it. And he said he promised. And so I got the car on my back, and I said, I've been up at the chapel praying. I said, oh, Gladys, by the way, I saw a rainbow. That was all I said. I didn't tell her about any other stuff yet. And, but we were one more day there, and then we wound up going back to America. And then I began to speak with Gladys a little more about what the Lord had shown me. And I shared it with a couple of my closest friends, and we'd been in ministry for, you know, at that point, 30 years together. And So that was how it happened. And when I told Gladys this, and I know that God is really calling us over to pray, and she didn't want to hear about it. You know, it was like, okay, you can go and be an intercessor for seasons. I'm going to stay home with the kids, and you know, I'm just going to carry on with my life. Financially, God did an amazing miracle, and we were able to come over. I was able to come over by myself, spend 2 weeks here in October of that year, 2002. I found out when I came up, the day after the Lord spoke to me, I came up with my camera to take some photographs. And there was a lady tending the flowers down at the bottom of a little parking lot. So I went to say hello and asked her about the meeting and stuff, and if the chapel was active, and she said, oh yes, they meet one time a month. Oh wow, okay. And I said, well, that's interesting because actually they're going to be meeting every day before long. Every night, I think I said. So anyway, but I came back and took the pictures, and I knew then when I came in the fall that there was one time a month that the meeting happened, but I didn't know then. They had no idea what the schedule was. So I asked my friend Alex, I explained how to get here, and I said, would you come over and find out when the meeting is? So I came over, and the morning I got here, this is just one quick little story, and then I'm going to wind it up. But I borrowed Alex's car, and it was raining that morning. I came down, I stopped the car just across from the gate in that little drive that goes down. And it was drizzling, and I was thinking, well, it was kind of quitting. And I thought, well, should I get out of the car? I really wanted to come up and pray up at the top of the cemetery again. I knew the chapel was locked. And at that point, as I was kind of hesitating with it, I thought, well, if it starts to rain, I could get under the eaves of the chapel or come in into the door. I was just about to get out of the car when I see this little car coming up the drive. And it must have been the caretaker. So he slowed down. I wound down my window. He stopped, wound down his window, and said, good morning. I said, good morning. He was all dressed with a tie and everything, as the old Welsh do in many places. And I said, excuse me, do you remember an American coming here 2 months ago asking about the schedule of meetings? He said, oh, yes, I remember. And I said, did he mention a friend of his that wanted to come over? He said, yes, I remember. He said, well, that would be me. Is there any chance that I could get into the chapel and pray for a bit? He said, oh, sure. Just go down to the cottage. My wife is there. She'll be happy to give you the key. Wound up his window, and off he went. And so I went down, knocked on the door of the cottage. This little lady comes to the door. And I said, I recognized her. It was the one who had told me about the meeting. I said, good morning. Do you remember me? And she thought, no, I'm not sure. I was here in the spring. I said, I told her there were going to be meetings in the chapel every night. Oh, yes, I remember now, she says. And, well, I just spoke with your husband. He asked if I could please get the key from you so I could go inside. So she gives me the key, and I came. And as I let myself in the door, and just the impression of, this is beautiful. It's not a derelict. And I sat down. I don't remember where I sat down. But one of the first things that the Lord kind of impressed on me is that not only everything that He showed me is going to come to pass, but that He had given me the key to the chapel. And, not just physically, but it was like this represented a key that God was giving me. But what really was kind of confirming things was that had I stopped in front of the chapel a minute earlier, the caretaker would have been out on the road. I'd never seen him or the car before, and I wouldn't have thought anything about it. If I'd been here a minute later, I would have been out of the car. I was just about to open the door and up in the cemetery. And he would have thought, well, somebody coming to put flowers on a grave, and he wouldn't have given it a second thought. But at that particular moment, I'd come 5,000 miles from New Orleans, and the Lord gave me the key to the chapel. And so that was apparently significant, because here I am, 16 years later. Yeah, 2002, 16 years later. And here's the key. And God has brought many people into this place to pray with us. We actually moved in May of 2005. What I wanted to say, just to finish, is that from that moment that I said yes to the Lord and He showed me the rainbow, literally not a single day in the 3 years that it took us to move went by without, in one way or another, God supernaturally confirming that this absolutely was His plan for our lives. Walk away from 30 years of Spanish ministry working with these guys since we all got saved. They gave us their blessings. They said, "Are you going to start a Spanish church in Wales?" Nope, that's not what God is asking me. But they weren't totally convinced in one sense, but they knew it was the Lord. They knew it was the Lord. They didn't understand it, but they just knew it was the Lord. So we got their blessing. After almost 30 years, they kind of gave us what we would call a severance package. That was kind of our nest egg to kind of get us going here. And it's just been an incredible time. Such a privilege to be able to just pray and watch God do His stuff. And how could we ever have known 13 years ago, 16 years ago? We've had people from 40 nations come and pray with us in this chapel, weep tears in this chapel, worship, prophesy, prostrate, because God is doing something. He's going to touch the nations of the world. So all the flags you see and the ones that aren't here yet represent people that have been here from all of these nations around the globe. And they're praying for Wales because they know that Wales has the key to revival in their nations. Now God is doing some amazing stuff all over the world, but we haven't seen anything yet. And we have no clue. When's it going to happen, God? But here we are today, and it's just such an honor to have you here, to be able to share God's heart with you. That He's made Wales part of our heart. Lord showed me one morning in my readings when Joseph's brothers go to Egypt, and they don't know who Joseph is, and he finds out there's a younger brother still alive, and he said, "Well, you're going to have to, I'm not going to let you go unless you come back with your younger brother." And they said, "Oh, you can't. You can't do that, because the heart of our Father is tied with the life of the Son." And God spoke to me. That's what He's done with our hearts, with this land of Wales. And so we don't have any secret tricks. We don't know what we're doing, but God knows what He's doing, and He orders the steps, and we don't need to figure it out. And I came out of a very kind of, our ministry became very gung-ho, we're going to go into all the world, and it was all about doing stuff for the Lord, rather than just sitting in His lap, and watching Him do stuff. So it's been really amazing.